Professor Kilovoth did not deal in stories. He dealt in the cold, hard architecture of extinction. To him, the history of life was a vast graveyard, and he was merely the caretaker. He stood before the concentric rings of the Inner System Academy's amphitheater, a soaring structure filled with the breath and rustle of 47 different species, and declared that survival was not a virtue. It was an accident with impeccable timing. He summoned holograms of the Theta 9, nightmare swarms that had consumed their world's biomass, and the phase hunters of Krell, who had turned their very bodies into sensor arrays to escape invisible predators. His thesis was elegant, brutal, and simple. Intelligence is a scar. It is a defensive mutation triggered only by the threat of total annihilation. He spoke of a cosmic pattern where spacefaring capability was the prize for not dying, but then he paused, tapping a clawed finger against the podium, bringing up a star chart with a conspicuous void where a name should be. "There is one exception," Kilovoth announced, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A species scrubbed from the archives. Bipedal. Pack hunters. They weaponized their environment and, according to fragments, did something unique in galactic history. They hunted for pleasure. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the Glen in the back stopped chewing. The idea was an evolutionary absurdity, energy expenditure without gain. Kilovoth dismissed the ghost species as a self-correcting error, a civilization that had inevitably consumed itself in a planetary cataclysm. They are gone, he assured them, and the universe is safer for it. It is a comforting thought, isn't it, that the wicked burn themselves out before they can burn the world, but in the deep dark, comfort is rarely truth. "Sir," the word cut through the lecture hall, sharp as broken glass. A figure stood in the back row near the exit. Human, female, small in stature, but radiating a stillness that made Kilovoth's neck ridges itch. Lieutenant Reeve. "That species you described? It's not extinct." Kilovoth laughed, a brittle sound that found no purchase in the sudden tension. "I assure you, the records—" "It's called Earth, sir." The revelation didn't just land, it detonated. Reeve descended the stairs and the air seemed to warp around her. She wasn't challenging a grade. She was challenging reality. She forced him to pull up the old files, the pre-integration surveys of Sol 3. And there it was, buried in the digital dust of 2 millennia. Dominant species exhibits problematic hunting behavior. Recommend indefinite observation. The auditorium erupted in a cacophony of chirps, clicks, and gasps, but Reeve took the podium with the casual confidence of an apex predator stepping into a clearing. She projected images of Earth's native horrors, the golden fury of an African lion, the prehistoric violence of a saltwater crocodile, jellyfish with venom that could stop a heart in mere beats. "Your planet was trying to kill you," a Fennet student breathed, skin crystallizing in shock. "Our planet didn't care if we lived," Reeve corrected, her voice echoing with the weight of geological cruelty. "So we had to." She played a grainy recording from the dawn of man, a persistence hunt. Humans running down prey not with speed, but with the terrifying inevitability of a glacier. A Volek student, trembling, read aloud from a medical file. Humans possessed a secondary threat response, not just fight or flight, but persistence mode, a biological override allowing them to ignore catastrophic injury and keep moving. "We evolved to keep fighting after we should be dead," Reeves stated, scanning the faces of species who had never known such desperation. "Because on Earth, if you went down, you didn't get back up. In stories of monsters, we often forget the cunning required to survive them." Reeve explained that humanity didn't wait for evolution to save them. They grabbed nature by the throat and forced it to heal. They took wolves, pack hunters, and turned them into family. They bred wild grasses into wheat. They didn't adapt to the environment. They adapted the environment to them. "That's not survival," someone whispered in horror. "That's conquest." "Call it what you want," Reeve replied. "We're still here." When Administrator Velis arrived to shut down the public relations disaster, it was already too late. The stream was live. The galaxy was watching. Reeve stood her ground, dissecting the human timeline. She showed them spears that replace claws, wheels that replace speed, and the horrific resilience that allowed them to survive volcanic winters and global plagues. Why haven't you taken over? A whistled question floated down from the upper tiers. Reeve looked at Velis, then at the crowd. Because we were quarantined. The truth hung there, stark and terrifying. The coalition hadn't welcomed humans, they had caged them. They had watched from the stars as humanity turned its tribalism into a global art form, inventing weapons capable of sterilizing their own biosphere. They saw a species that held a gun to its own head and called it deterrence. They chose integration, Reeves said softly, because isolation made us worse. When humans are cut off, we get paranoid. We manufacture enemies. The treaty wasn't a handshake, it was a conditional surrender. Humans accepted monitoring and demilitarization to prove they could exist without destroying everything they touched. A Dran scholar moved closer, asking why, if they were so dangerous, did they mourn? Why did they cry at sunsets? Because we remember, Reeves said, and the steel in her voice finally broke, revealing the soul beneath. We remember every species we erased, every forest we burned. We carry those ghosts. We are terrified of doing it again. It was a confession that shifted the very gravity of the room. They weren't looking at a monster anymore. They were looking at a penitent. Kylevo stood in the wreckage of his life's work. His theory of accidental survival lay in ruins, dismantled by a creature that had turned survival into an engineering project. I need to rewrite my thesis, he murmured. You really do, Reeve agreed. She left him then, walking out into a corridor buzzing with the energy of a paradigm shift. Kylevoth turned back to his console. He deleted his opening line. Survival is not an accident, he typed, the words glowing with new meaning. It is a choice made against impossible odds, sustained by creatures too stubborn to accept extinction. On a distant blue world, billions of those creatures continued their impossible experiment, waking up, choosing peace over violence, and trying, against all their instincts, to be better than they were. It wasn't guaranteed to work. But as the professor now understood, in a universe of entropy, the attempt itself was the only light that mattered.